Yeah, well, the first thing is in what you've already said, which is that in order to really enjoy our lives, as adults anyway, we need to take responsibility for our own experiences.
Yes.
That we could just spend the rest of our conversation talking about that. I don't think we need to, but like that is something that people typically they understand the words, but really do not see their lack of implementation.
We're happy to have you here.
And I have so much stuff I want to talk to you about. I hope I can keep it all like in order.
I'm so glad to hear that because I've listened to a bunch of your shows and I was like, I wonder where we're going to go.
Yeah.
Probably not as far off base as you think. I think.
Okay, well, I'm glad to discover together.
Where are you?
I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Oh.
8:30 this morning.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Are
Yes.
you in, I have an aunt in Marin County. Are you anywhere near there?
I am actually. I'm not in Marin County, but I'm closer to Marin County than I am to San Francisco.
Ah.
I'm maybe 20 minutes away.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Do you spend time here?
We used to spend quite a bit of time there because my mom was there. And then now my mom's gone, so we don't. So, but we love it out in California.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you know how beautiful it is.
It is.
I know you're in Central Time. Where are you located?
So we're outside of Houston, Texas. We live in the Woodlands, Texas.
Oh, okay.
But this podcast studio is in a place called Tomball.
Okay. Amazing. Well, I'm super intrigued that you do what you do so loud and proud and upfront in the state of Texas. That is amazing.
It's actually much easier to do it here than it is in California.
Okay, I understand that.
Yeah.
For a few years I lived in rural Kansas, not too far from Amarillo by way of Oklahoma. And so I just encountered, it's probably very different in Houston, but when I lived in that part of the country, I understand it's legal, but it's not.
It's not as well. It's not as well accepted.
Probably know what I mean.
We're from Wichita, Kansas, so we understand.
Okay, got it.
I think conservative states seem to have let businesses run, and liberal states tend to have more control over businesses, and that's really what it comes down to for us. It's really a business. So
I understand, and I wasn't thinking so much about the business aspect as much as just all the conservative judgments about behaviors.
Oh no, that's still there. I mean, you're going to still find that across the board, but that's another reason why we're loud and proud.
Actually. Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Probably you have less judgment of people in California, or especially in San Francisco area.
Yeah, I would say San Francisco Bay Area specifically.
Yeah.
Although I will just say before we get started, because since you're from Wichita, you'll understand this, so I'm a New York Jew, just to be clear. And we moved to rural Kansas, Southwest Kansas, to liberal.
Oh, yeah. I've been to liberal a ton of times. My dad built some churches there.
Amazing. Okay. Well, we moved there 2010 and then moved to the Bay Area in 2012. So Obama was in office. And when we moved there, there were 40 churches and one bookstore. And within a few months of our being there, the bookstore went out of business.
Yeah.
My husband is also white. We have 4 children. We homeschool. And it was just assumed that we were evangelical Christians homeschooling because that's what the Bible said to do. And just living a certain life, which 100% is not who we are. But I didn't realize people actually lived that way. I thought it was like caricatures from the New Yorker magazine. And so I didn't intentionally mislead anybody, but there were all kinds of people that I became very close friends with whose husbands never would have let them spend time with me if they had known who I really am. But I was just being genuine, and they were making projections and assumptions, and I only caught on once the whole thing was played out. But for me, I'm so grateful for that time because I didn't have politics or religion or education or life experience. I didn't have any of the travel. I didn't have any of the usual things to connect with because they didn't have in common what I had. And I really learned to open my heart more in order to connect with people because I couldn't use the usual routes of, hey, have you read this book? Or have you been here? Or do you like this movie? None of that pertained. And it really became a spiritual practice to just connect human to human, heart to heart without expectation. And I'm very grateful for having lived in such a conservative, wacky place.
Oh, that's really cool that you would say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Are we ready?
Mm-hmm. I'm rolling.
Okay.
All right, let's do it.
Yay.
Are you going to open?
You want me to open?
Yes, please.
Okay. Hey, everyone. It's John and Jackie with OpenLove101.com. And I am super excited today because we get to interview Alexandra Stockwell. And I have to just tell you a little bit, and I'd love to be able to say that I can do this from memory, but I can't. So I'm going to have to read it. But you are going to be amazed at what this woman does. Alexandra is known as the intimacy doctor, which has me super intrigued, and is an intimate marriage expert who specializes in showing couples how to build beautiful, long-lasting, passionate relationships, which is so important.
It is.
She is the best-selling author of Uncompromising Intimacy and host of the Intimate Marriage podcast. After 12 years in medicine, Alexandra studied the science and art of emotional and sensual connection to help her patients heal their relationships. She helps her clients get more out of life and their relationships. I mean, what more is there? Right? So welcome. Thank you so much for being on our program.
I'm so glad to be here, and thank you for such an honoring way of sharing who I am.
Well, first of all, the very first thing that I want to ask you is what compelled you to make the switch from being kind of, just this medical doctor to transfer into this other field of who we are?
Steve Jobs said we can only connect the dots in hindsight, and my story is definitely an example of that. So now, to me anyway, it feels like this totally logical, internally coherent transition because I'm still serving couples and families just with different tools, different contexts, but that's not actually how it happened. So I was in my mid-30s. I was married. We had 3 children. We now have 4. And I'd paid off all my medical school loans. I had my own small holistic practice north of Boston. What I'm trying to convey is that every goal that I had worked very hard to achieve had been realized. And I assumed that I would have some sense of satisfaction, like a kind of contentment, which was like the pot of gold at the end of my 15-year, very intense rainbow journey. And it wasn't that way. I love being a doctor. I enjoyed practicing medicine, but inside, really more at the level of a whisper, there was a kind of a hollowness for me that really clarified that I didn't want to keep doing this for another 4 decades, that something was missing. And I didn't really know what. And at the time, I didn't know any doctors who'd left medicine other than due to addiction or injury. Now it's a much more common phenomenon, but it wasn't when I did this. And so I arranged to take a sabbatical. And what I did during that sabbatical was, for really the first time in my adult life, I gave myself permission to do things because I felt like it. Everything I had done before, even taking vacations, for that matter, having sex with my husband, in some ways, it was a means to an end, to achieve something, to create a certain experience. And so to just do things because I felt like it. First of all, I realized I had no idea what I wanted when I had that opportunity. So things started from there, and I took a dancing class. I sat by the river. One thing led to another, and I really enhanced and kind of reconnected with a juiciness in my life across the board. Except while my husband and I didn't our sex life was okay, but it was more functional. It was nothing like what the poets write about as this opportunity. I enjoyed the sex, but I didn't feel closer afterwards. I didn't feel like our hearts had opened to one another as a result of what our bodies were doing. And so that was the next frontier for me to explore as I was on this sabbatical. And so really for my own sensuality and sexuality and my own marriage, I did an extremely in-depth training, very edgy and varied. And it happened to double as a coach training. So I didn't know what a coach was back in those days. I took my MD very seriously. Coach was way too casual at the time. I mean, I just didn't know what it was. But I was there for my own growth. But I'm curious. So I thought, well, let me just check out the teaching lab, see what that's about. And then I was like, oh, I've come home. This is how I want to serve individuals, couples, families, and the whole world. And so I have been coaching since 2013.
That's amazing. And you mentioned the teaching lab, and you felt like that was where you needed to be. What was it specifically in that particular lab that was so intriguing to you, or it really hit home?
I'm so fascinated that you're asking these questions, because there's a way in which they relate to open relating and they're totally unrelated. So I'm just going to go ahead and answer.
Okay,
but
sure.
I enjoy your question. Yeah. So as a physician, being able to serve my patients inherently means holding back who I am. I always had a good bedside manner and was empathic, but the focus was really entirely on what was happening for the patient, at least consciously. That's the setup of how it's supposed to be. And my role was to be kind and objective and efficient. And in relationship coaching, it really is an invitation for me to bring all of who I am. Now, it doesn't mean that when I coach, the sessions are about me and my life, but there's a way in which I'm not leaving parts of who I am or my life experience outside because they don't pertain. I end up telling all kinds of stories about my own marriage to my clients when it's a gift for them, not because I just am in the mood to talk about myself. Right. It's all very strategic, but there's a way in which, let me put it this way. One of the first times that I coached in this teaching lab, I was, of course, way more comfortable than the other people discussing very intimate things, having one-on-one conversations, because I was a physician. I touched all kinds of anatomy, and it's very straightforward for me to do so. But as a doctor, I'm trained to ask questions, make a diagnosis, and then give an assessment and plan. There's a kind of hierarchical quality where I know, and they're supposed to do what I say. And I did that with kindness with this client who was young and not particularly educated. Like this was just a very genuine piece of feedback. She said, in the part that for me was asking questions and making the diagnosis, she felt connection between us. And that when I gave my assessment and plan, she felt like I was disconnected. She couldn't feel who I am anymore. And that was her casual feedback. I told her years later how impactful it was for me. She didn't remember. It was just an unremarkable moment for her. But for me, to have a client say, I don't feel you present anymore, and therefore what you're telling me is less valuable, and the way that you can help me is going to be less impactful, I suddenly saw that this is a way where I can impact people so deeply and also heal myself. For me, being a coach, while it's not a self-centered experience, it has been profoundly healing. And we all know what this is like. If you're having sex with someone, you can tell if they're present or if they're not, unrelated to what is physically going on.
Sure.
And I felt like it was an equivalent piece of feedback that this client was giving me about the nature of my presence, even though everything I was doing was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that got my attention. That revealed something about my humanity, about the nature of connection, and quite frankly, what I wanted to learn so I could teach other people, not so they become coaches, but so that they learn how to be present with one another in a way that is meaningful.
I love that.
I do too.
And I think that's a piece of our communication that gets lost so often. Because I think, like you said, sometimes it's just we end up imparting information to one another and not really listening to who our partner is, who we are, what we want. I mean, that was a comment that you made early on about, what did I want? I did all of these things that I felt were expected of me, or that would, at the end of me doing them, I would feel this huge amount of satisfaction and gratification that I'd done it. But somehow I was still feeling like there was a part of me that was missing or empty, or like I thought this was supposed to feel different. And so when it becomes that question of what do you want, and how to make those connections with your partner, that can be almost alarming when you realize you don't know what that is, or you don't have the answer right away. What do you want?
Yeah, and I think there's so many reasons for that. First of all, we grow up expecting that we know what our body wants and needs, and that is not always the case. But also, like, if you think of how much time we spend in school, that contributes to our conditioned behavior so much. And we're used to being asked a question, and then we need to give the answer. I don't know if that noise was distracting. I naturally just snapped my finger to make the point. If you're in math class and it's like, what's the answer to this algebraic equation? The teacher's not going to call on the person who's going to sit with it for a moment and then carefully. No, across the board, not just math, in literature, it's reading, writing, everything. We are used to quick responses. And I think even to the point of feeling like we're not worthy of the attention and the time from somebody else that is sometimes necessary to access enough spaciousness inside to find what the real answer is, rather than the answer that we think we should be giving.
100% agree with that. I 100% agree with that. And I think your tie into education is a perfect example of how that is. Because again, it's like that imparting that information, giving the right answer. And that can really be an entry into us continuing to do that in every aspect of our lives, especially in our relationships. I know I've been guilty of that with John and I. He'll ask me something and I'll find myself, in the past giving an answer that I think is going to be an appropriate answer, but is it really the answer that, if I sat in it for a minute and felt comfortable enough in it, to give the answer that I want? And, there can be a plethora of reasons why we do that in our relationships. But I think,
I just want to highlight, I think you're pointing to something so nuanced, sophisticated, and significant, because I'm usually having a version of this conversation in the context of talking about conflict, because I am all about using conflict to create more connection rather than discord. And one of the ways of doing that really is to focus on the connection more than the content, to have room for the real truth to emerge, the things we're talking about. But it's a whole other level of prioritizing that when you're having a conversation about desire, when you're having a conversation about something wonderful, there is no conflict, to then really, it's a little bit like what a woman needs to go through if she doesn't orgasm right away, to give herself permission to actually have a lover and her take the time that it takes for that to happen, any woman needs to work through feeling worthy of that. And I think that's true in communication too. And I want to be very clear, it's not just women at all. The conditioning is different, but for a man to take the time, not to know what goes with being a man and his opinion and his context, but to really feel what he wants, that's also something that is not very common. It's different with different genders, but it's present for all of us.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean,
Yeah,
you and I have gone through some of that where, there's something within me that I would like to experience, and to have the courage to be able to share it with you, and to be, it really, and once we did, it became very empowering, and for both of us, and you doing the same thing, Jackie, especially early in our relationship, because she comes from a very conservative background where what we are today would definitely not be acceptable. But she had it in her mind that it's something she wanted to experiment with, and to see what it felt like. And it became, I saw how empowered it made her become. It was like she changed. And you had to trust me with those things that you want to experience.
Well, you touch on it when we talk about desire. And I had desires, but when he asked me what my desires were, what I wanted, I was really shocked by my own frozen stance. Mm-hmm. I knew what my desires were, but how on earth was I going to tell him what my desires were? Because 1, what would that say about me? 2, what would he think about me? 3, what would I think about me? What would that mean if I actually told somebody a desire or a fantasy or something that I wanted? How was I going to ask for that? How was I going to be patient enough to receive that? How was I going to, what did that even look like? So it was really interesting to be 48 years old, which is how old I was when we reconnected, and to be asked that, and to realize that I really didn't know how to answer that. And that was kind of sad. I almost felt sorry for myself. I'm like, oh my gosh, you don't even know how to express what it is that you want. Just even the trust, the self-trust to be able to say it out loud, and to be able to be responsible, 100% responsible for what happened in the aftermath of that, because knowing that my truth had that kind of value. So, that was a whole process to get through that, and to even say, well, I think I might want to try this, and to have him say, well, let's do it. I'm like, my head blew up. And so it was really the pathway to learning how to do a lot of things that you help others realize that they have the power and the permission to do. And like you said, it's not just the women, it's the men. Mm-hmm. We can't just, that guilt or shame or hesitancy, that doesn't just fall all on the women's shoulders. I mean, we have the men too. I mean, we're all taught and we're raised in certain ways. So we all have things we carry into our relationships.
Right, we do.
Yeah, and I think for men, there's a conditioning that men are expected to have, I'll just say, edgier desires. Like they're expected to have testosterone flowing in their bodies. But when good men are in good marriages, that is not the thing that they are operating with. And so to reclaim that animal quality and benefit from it is a very significant journey that is not easy for a good man to take. But for a woman, I love what you said when you listed all the considerations, including what would you think of yourself? Mm-hmm. And there's a way in which hearing you talk, it's so beautiful what you describe and the growth that came from that vulnerability. And it went well. I always start when I coach or really with any issue that arises, what do you want? And so I know you are in the situation of knowing what you wanted, and so many aren't. I have a very simple course. It's just $49, and it consists of teaching 3 things. It's an independent study program so anyone can do it without anybody knowing they're doing it. Where the first thing I teach is to identify what you want, because many people get stuck on that. The second is how to make friends with your desires, how to accept that that is what you want, because some people get stuck on that. And then the third, which is actually my favorite, is how to ask for what you want so it feels really good to give it to you, because that is a place that really is lacking in our cultural education, because so often when a woman wants something, it either comes out in a way that makes it feel like she doesn't believe she deserves it, which does not inspire. It's not upon her partner to do the work to believe she deserves. I mean, he or she might offer that, but it's on a woman to ask for what she believes she wants and to feel that way. But the way it happens even most often for a woman expressing a desire is that she makes her partner wrong for not having already provided it, for not having been a mind reader, for not having known to touch her that way, or known that she likes pink roses and not red. Like whatever it is just easier to access being critical than the vulnerability and the deliciousness of sharing a desire in a way that prioritizes what that communication feels like for both people, so it can feel wonderful to give it to you.
Can we talk about that for just a minute? Because I think that is so important. The criticizing, because really, isn't that a form of projection? It keeps us from having to do anything if we can continue to focus the attention on the other person. So how do we empower the women or whoever to speak their truth of what it is that they're wanting and be encouraged by that, or feel at peace in that desire or that piece of information, or in a way that conveys that they want to work together with their partner to have the best relationship that they can have, instead of grinding against each other as far as, you're not doing this for me, or you should know that I want this, or we've been together this many years. What do you mean you don't know that I like this? Or, I mean, it's just, how do we work together? Sometimes we just make it so hard.
Yeah, well, the first thing is in what you've already said, which is that in order to really enjoy our lives, as adults anyway, we need to take responsibility for our own experiences.
Yes.
That we could just spend the rest of our conversation talking about that. I don't think we need to, but like that is something that people typically, they understand the words, but really do not see their lack of implementation. It's one of the things that I end up pointing out, because when people perceive it and are willing to change, whole new possibilities open. It's one of the most significant ways to enhance a relationship, is to actually take responsibility for what you are co-creating. Go first. If one of you needs to change and improve or be kind, be the one who does it first. Don't wait for the other person. That's too long a wait. So in addition to taking responsibility, what I think is so important is to affirm what is working, what is going well. Because anyone that you're making a desire to, I'm just going to use an example of a heteronormative couple, and the woman has a desire and wants to say it to her husband, and we just know that he may blow up with anger. She might be worried about that. She also may be worried, or she may not be worried, but she should, that he's going to hear it and just internally collapse, feeling inadequate. And how come he didn't realize she was dissatisfied for all this time? Like, there are all these different scenarios. That's just to of ways that this could play out such that they both conclude it would have been better if she'd said nothing. And so what we're really talking about is not what actions are taken, but how this can be a communication that ends with both of them feeling so glad that it happened. And so the way to do that is to start by affirming what's working. You know, I love having sex with you. I love all of the different ways we've gotten to know one another's bodies. And it's made me feel curious about even more possibilities. Do you want to hear what I'm thinking about? Like I'm not saying that that's how every woman would communicate, you know, but
but the way you just said it, I would say, yes, tell me more, tell me more.
Right. And I just know that that's not how everyone is going to do it. It needs to be true to you. But the point is, in a way, it gets back to what I shared about my own life from earlier in our conversation. If you're only focused on the goal, on the outcome of this communication, it will be less than if you also focus on the experience while you're making the communication. How are you feeling? How is he feeling? Pause and check in. Say you're feeling nervous. Like, the more vulnerable and complete you can convey your experience, the more of an opportunity for him to really meet you there.
How would you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you think people communicate at that level? With 10 being the best and 1 being the worst.
Yeah. Probably around 2 and 3 for the most part.
Yeah.
Even when the communications go well enough. I mean, here's the thing. In my book, I talk about 4 kinds of relationships, and the one which I think is the most common, we really have an epidemic in the Western world, is the toleration relationship, which is basically characterized as conflict-free and passion-free. And in that relationship, first of all, because the capacity to communicate with vulnerability and connectedness is typically around a 2 or a 3, maybe around things related to parenting, it can be up to 5 if you have views together, or, you know, it varies. But anyway, one of the reasons it's low is because the vast majority of couples are more comfortable having sex than discussing sex. So they don't even get to be on the scale, which brings down the average a lot. But in any case, most couples are just used to tolerating less vitality, less depth, less of the juiciness and vulnerability and risk in sharing a desire like we're talking about. They just keep things conflict-free and don't take those risks. That's just the most common thing. And the context for that is compromise, which is absolutely the most common relationship advice that is given throughout North America, the Western world, maybe the whole world. I've spoken about this and had people go get me their wedding cards, Hallmark's finest, you know. Compromise is what makes a marriage work. We've all heard this, and it's just completely wrong. That's why my book is called Uncompromising Intimacy, because I think that is key to being able to share desires and have them heard well. And what I mean by uncompromising is not at all that you always get your own way. No. But where compromise is basically not saying what you want, what's happening inside you, like what's real for you on smaller, big issues, but not expressing it because it will be inconvenient or uncomfortable for your partner. When it comes to being uncompromising, it's about learning how to share the whole truth of who you are with your partner in a way that they can hear it.
And once the person hears that, And, a lot of times the reaction, as we spoke about earlier, can be negative. It can be, there can be anger, especially with men. I know some men that are friends and they don't even want their wife to have a play toy because they feel like, well, that means I'm not good enough for her. And so how do we share those desires? I mean, you gave one example earlier, but without having compromise. I mean, compromising in this case might be
just not speaking up.
Yeah, it is. And I think that happens often. We hear it from people in our emails all the time. How do I get my partner to maybe have an interest in opening up our relationship a little bit? That's probably our number one email or question that we get from couples. How do I get my partner to do this? And, we always say, well, you can't get your partner to do anything, but it's important to be able to share what you're feeling and at least communicate the desire to your partner and see what comes back.
So I deeply believe and continually have reaffirmed that having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill. And like anything that we learn, it makes sense to start small. So whether it's training wheels all the way up to a mountain bike or learning to write sentences and then paragraphs, we want to start building the skills with benign context. So if someone's listening and you want to bring up opening your relationship to your spouse, don't start there. Start by saying that you actually prefer to wear sneakers rather than dress shoes to a particular event. Start by saying, we always have Italian food. I know you prefer it, but wait, actually, that was the wrong tone to make this point. That's exactly what we can go into, and I don't recommend that. It's more like, we always go for Italian food. I know you and the children prefer that, and so I can find something on the menu, but I've really been craving Korean food, and I'd really like to go. So let's get takeout from both places and eat in a park. Let's, you all can have pizza at home and then be full when we go to the Korean restaurant, and maybe you'll find some soup you like and I can enjoy those ribs or whatever. Like you want to start with things that really are not that important, like going to the gym and starting with 5-pound weights and then building to 10. And I don't know what the equivalent weight amount would be for bringing up opening the relationship, but also just to be really direct, if you haven't been talking about sex at all, do not start with that question. You need to start with, like, what do you enjoy about the sex you're having? And if you can't think of anything, think of, well, I don't know, was there a time when you enjoyed having sex, even though it's been 5 years ago? Like, what's a highlight in your sexual life together? And honestly, if you can't come up with one, it's not the time to open your relationship, in my estimation. You want to really work on the sex between the two of you first. But the point is, find your way into talking about sex with one another so that the only additional variable is wanting to open the relationship, that you already are used to saying things that one another isn't going to expect, that you have developed enough trust to navigate these conversations, that you're already talking about your sex and have tried different things to enhance it with one another. And only when all of that, I don't know that it's like downright comfortable, like sitting down and watching Netflix, but you've done it enough that you trust your relationship will not only survive, but thrive because you're having these conversations. Put your attention there, and then you're ready to graduate to bringing up open relating. That's my view. I'd love to hear what the two of you think, since you answer this question a lot more than I do.
We definitely start with communicating, because a lot of times the people that ask that question haven't even, as you said, they haven't even talked about things they like sexually with each other. And in order to communicate moving your relationship, opening it up to other people, or maybe even just it could be some kind of kink play or BDSM play.
Yeah. Or adding a toy even.
Adding
Even
a toy
that.
even.
They have to have communication first. And what I've found many times is there's not a lot of communication there. It's just this fantasy that a person has that that's up here, that's a high level fantasy. And they haven't even talked about the little things like you're talking about. And so we definitely, talk to them in a similar way. Let's start small and work towards that. Build the trust with each other and communicating about sex before you move on to this level where trust is really, really important to have before you can open a relationship up. A trust, on every level within the relationship itself.
Yeah, and trust that you can communicate about whatever's going to happen too, which I'm sure you meant.
And that without fear,
Yes.
from your partner lashing out at you for some reason. So
if they do lash out, that you have the capacity to navigate it, because there's no way to set this up to guarantee there will never be lashing out. There's no way to put everything in place to be certain you're going to avoid that.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Well, and to understand that that's communication too.
Yes.
Right? So if because you brought up a great example about, maybe a woman wanting to have a toy and then the husband feeling inadequate for some reason because she wants to do that. That's communication. And if we have those communications, with our partner, the reason that those are so vital is it says so much more about where the husband is emotionally, from a safety standpoint, from a self-use standpoint, than it even does about her saying that she wants to use a toy. Why am I not good enough that you have to use the toy? So what happens is, I think so often is we get stuck on, he has a problem with me doing, like, this is something I'm not getting to do, instead of, ooh, this is some kind of trigger for him. There's some kind of something going on much deeper in that statement that we could have important communication about. But I think, like you said, what happens so often is we don't go past that because it's too uncomfortable. We don't want to actually get to the solution of what's going on, but we don't even realize that's what we're doing. Like, that we're stopping that wonderful opening up of a learned experience that we can have together, that we can help each other, so that we both end up feeling better and closer and more intimate within the relationship by having those what we perceive as difficult conversations.
Yes, and the truth of what you say is so difficult to appreciate, because it goes deeper and more relevant. And I love saying how in a long-term committed relationship, everything which isn't sex functions as foreplay. It either brings you a little closer together or pushes you a little bit further apart. And so that obviously isn't true with a one-night stand or early in dating, where you can have a very incredible experience without even knowing your partner's name. But that's not the way it is when you have a life together, when you're waking up in the same bed and just making choices together. And so as I was really both exploring and developing this methodology, I noticed when my husband and I would go some amount of time without having sex, the very first thing that I would and do ask myself is there something that I haven't shared with him? And in our case, about 80, maybe 90% of the time, the answer is yes. And let me be very clear. It might be about sex, but it also might not be about sex. It might be about a conference I want to go to that I know it's going to be at a very inconvenient time for him if I'm away, because he'll have to take care of the children and it's a busy time for him too. Or it might be that I really want to purchase something that is a high enough amount that we need to discuss it, but it's not a slam dunk that he's going to be supportive. Like, whatever it is, that there's something, or it could even be that I can't stand that he made such and such a comment in front of other people. Like, it could be minor, it could be major, but there's something that I have an emotional experience about that I haven't expressed to him. And when I share that with him, it's very likely that suddenly we're back in the erotic flow. And the small number of times when I've asked myself, is there something I haven't said? And the answer was no. I felt pretty clean in that way. And I've asked him, hey, is there anything you haven't told me? One time it was so remarkable to me. He took time, like we were talking about earlier. He said, because that's not something he would have a quick answer to. It's not a question he's asking himself very often. And so he thought about it. And then he said, yes. And I, like, my stomach drops. I'm like, oh shit, what is it? And he went on to tell me about a very challenging personnel situation at work with one of the employees that he supervises, who really was working against him with what he was trying to build for his department. And all these intricacies of what was coming up for him in terms of a sense of frustration and inadequacy and unsure how to proceed so that he could carry his vision through, which he was totally dedicated to doing. The point is that it had nothing to do with me, but it was something that he was carrying. And as soon as he told me, again, we were back in our erotic flow. So I think communication about sex is so important, but communication about whatever is living in us, in the sense that I mean being uncompromising, is also so important for the juiciness and dynamic energy in a marriage or a committed relationship.
Gosh, that is so poignant.
Doesn't it
and
sound
it's
familiar,
so
though?
true. Yes.
Recently, we had a conversation. There'd been a couple of days where we have sex often. So when 2 days go by and we don't, red flags.
Like, what is going on?
At least yellow flags appear. So, and I think it had to do with just that. You sat me down and you had talked to someone. They said, ask John if he's got anything going on in his life. And it was just that. It had to do with one of my many businesses, and there was some troubling stuff going on, at least challenging, and I just wasn't in the mood. My mind was there. But once I shared with her what it was, just like you described, probably 50% of it melted away, and it left open that the desire filled up the other 50% again. So it was enough to get us reconnected for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and it may result in, sharing that then there's some resolution and you have a new solution to whatever was going on with the business. But that is not my point at all. It mostly is that it takes energy. It takes energy that we don't perceive to hold something back and compartmentalize.
It does.
And it's not that we should become like compulsive talkers, sharing everything. I am so not advocating that. It's that if there's something we feel we can't or shouldn't share, that we should keep to ourselves, whether it's for me or for him, that creates a tension which functions as disconnection between the two of us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I like how you describe it as energy, right? Because I know, at least for me, that's not how I categorize something that's going on with me. I don't think of it as depleting my energy. But that explains then why everything else in my life kind of becomes this heavy task I have to do, or it becomes a task instead of this joyful thing that I get to do. And to even be conscious that that's what we're doing. If we could get over that hurdle, it probably would open us up for more. We call it communication, but it's this way of keeping ourselves open and flowing, right? We kind of dam ourselves up anytime we stop talking.
Yes, and the more competent we are in our society, the more successful, the more educated, whatever competent means in a particular circumstance, we can just be certain that has meant that we have become very skillful with compartmentalization. There's no way to be really competent and successful without a good amount of compartmentalization,
Right.
which works to a degree anyway with being successful in the areas we're successful in. However, when it comes to our sexuality, that really is not contingent on compartmentalization, really great connected, I'm not talking about getting off, but I mean like great connected, the kind of sex you want to have with the person you're married to, that requires a level of integration of our different aspects, which is diametrically opposite to the kind of compartmentalization that we have to become skillful at in order to be competent and successful in our society. So I think like to get to the point where you can be impactful and successful in the world and having fantastic sex is such a personally beautiful, transformational journey that there's no shortcut to.
Yeah, you have to go through that. You have to take those steps, right? To be, to have those tools, to be successful in that. Gosh, I just love what you do. And I love the angle that you come at relationships with. It's so refreshing, really.
Yeah, it is. And I think it really, I can see how just, by sitting down with you today, how it would get couples to really think about other ways to move forward with the relationship and not necessarily open it up like we are, but open it up together even, and to be able to enjoy more with each other.
Right. I mean,
it's interesting because I've had many people assume that I am just not at all interested in ethical non-monogamy because I don't talk about it. But I've had people who are polyamorous just assume that I am. And it's not because I am, it's not because I'm like a people pleaser and adjusting myself for the circumstance. It's that's not the most important question for me. The most important question is, how alive can you feel in your relationship? And then what's the sexuality that's going to have that be so? And I really look at intimate relationships as the ultimate vehicle for personal growth. So where are you going to grow more? Where are you going to feel gratified? Where are you going to discover new aspects of yourself and learn how to share them with another person? I mean, that's what intimacy is about for me. And yeah, for me personally, it's really not so much about the format, if you will, or what play people or tools are involved. It's about being true to your desire and what vitality and sensual aliveness and fueling your life with erotic gratification. How are you going to create that? That's what interests me.
Yeah, that's great.
That's almost like a mic drop moment, right? I mean, like that's.
And you know what, with couples in a monogamous relationship, regular monogamous relationships or consensual non-monogamous. I mean, we deal more with people that are in consensual non-monogamous relationships.
Yes.
And what we have found when they decide to go down that path, how much it does open up communication with each other and trust and the sensuality that comes with their play. And many times it's only the couple. They may come to one of our clubs and they like the feeling of maybe being watched or playing in a bed next to another couple that's having sex with each other and not interacting with the other couple necessarily, but being around the sounds and the sight and the smells and everything that goes along with having, this wonderful sex. And that for a lot of couples, really, you just see them blossom with the communication between each other. So many times we'll meet couples first time they come to the club ever. We've never been to a club like this. We really want to see what it's like. And they leave, like you can just see this glow about them, whether or not they played with someone else or not, just to be able to go down that path together and explore that together is really huge, and it really does wonders for the relationship. When we talk to them as they go through time and how their relationship has opened up and they've become more close, they're closer together. Some of the things you talk about that shut down relationships, where you see them become kind of bland and stagnant. And this is one way where it can open up. And it's not for everybody, of course, but we definitely have seen how it's taken couples to the next, their relationship just changes and it becomes really beautiful.
Yeah, I love what you're describing because you're really talking about calibrating whatever the next step is. And what next step is just the right amount of edgy and erotically intriguing and risky. It could honestly be driving to one of your clubs and sitting in a parked car with the lights off, watching people go in and out. That might be the right starting point, and a couple does that 3-4 times, and then they're ready to walk in the door.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And all they do is agree to be in there for 20 minutes and then go home. And that, again, might be enough, or this couple may go on to be the most well-loved couple in the club. Like, for me, it's really about calibrating the right next step for the two of you, which, again, is what we were talking about earlier around desire, because I think more of our conversation, we focused on when people don't act on their desires, aren't aware of their desires. But I'm sure you see this too, that it can be equally dangerous to go way beyond the desires, to like take steps that are too big, and then both people get hurt because they're like out of touch with themselves because it's almost been forced, even though they intellectually both want it. So I think knowing oneself and being willing to find the sweet spot in calibrating what the next step to take is also a very important part of this journey being successful.
Right.
Absolutely. And we work with couples on establishing boundaries.
Yeah.
Where they each look at themselves and what they would like to do and what they're okay with their partner doing from both sides, and then communicate about those. And then maybe taking, baby steps, the ones that they're both in agreement on, sitting in the parking lot, for instance, and watch people go in. If they both agree that that's a step they want to take, then take that step and explore that together. And then if something opens up down the road, maybe, something that causes them a little bit of angst, but then they realize, maybe I could do that. Maybe I could see Jackie kissing another man and be okay with it. Maybe take that step together. And we find that when couples do that and take it slow, and they end up having a great time, and they get to learn about each other along the way.
Totally.
And then what you have expressed, there are times where they may go beyond their boundary, and it really does, it causes someone to have a lot of fear, and that fear may come out in terms of anger or jealousy. That's a time to take a step back, and also a time to really look at oneself and to see where that fear is stemming from. It can be something from a long, long time ago. And that gives us an opportunity to work on ourselves as well.
Absolutely. And that work is exciting too.
It is. Sometimes the most exciting. Absolutely.
I think the bottom line in what we're talking about, whether you're in a monogamous relationship or a consensually non-monogamous relationship, it's about working through those hard conversations. And, I think for a lot of couples that come into consensually non-monogamous relationships, part of the path that they've had to take in order to get to that is that they have had those hard conversations. They've taken it from revealing it all the way through to a conclusion. And those are powerful, incredibly intimate moments that you build within your relationship consciously. We're going to take this topic and we're going to work together to come to a conclusion on it. And, I think, like you've said, if we can continue to do that in our relationships, whatever the relationship model is, because that's really kind of secondary. What's important is what's happening between those two people. And do they even feel like they have the power to construct a relationship that works for them instead of trying to keep up with the Joneses kind of thing. And that's what I love about the work that you're doing. That's why I love that you wrote this book and how you offer these courses to just, it's not pointing out the obvious, but it kind of is. It's like, okay, we talk about communication, but I'm going to even tell you what that means. I'm going to break it down for you into such layman terms that you're going to have these aha moments. So I love that.
I'm really inspired by what you're saying. I have an email in my inbox from someone who brought up consensual non-monogamy and it didn't go well with his wife. I don't know this person. This is the first communication. And I'm just listening to you and thinking, I think my answer, at least until I come up with the next version, in general to that question is going to be, don't bring it up with the outcome of opening the marriage. Bring it up with the outcome of having a really intricate, challenging conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is more likely to get you the opening outcome, but just forget about that for now.
Right?
Lower the expectations.
Yes.
We talk about that often. So
It's like, we almost set ourselves up for failure, right?
Exactly. And I also really appreciate what you say about common sense because, yes, in my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, where I describe how to communicate in an uncompromising way, there are 6 keys to doing that. And every single one, when anyone hears them, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, I know about that. Well, let me tell you, there is so much more. So the 6 are cultivate curiosity, embrace honesty, be kind, choose happiness, take responsibility, and seek growth. Those are all very easy phrases to understand, but I'm coaching a couple now who I think he read my book 3 years ago, and then I've been coaching them for about 6 months. And something came up where I said, yes, and this is a place to cultivate curiosity. And he's a good student. And he knew all about cultivating curiosity. And he's like, oh my God, yes. Like the way to actually live cultivating curiosity, taking responsibility, choosing happiness, it is so far from common sense, even though it sounds like common sense advice. Insofar as common sense is what everyone's doing. It's what I like. Truly, my mission is that this is the norm. So instead of people thinking, oh, you get married, the relationship lasts, and if you don't open it up, passion just tapers off. That's like the relationship model we all consciously or unconsciously have. And I am totally devoted to making uncompromising intimacy the relationship model. So even if a couple isn't living it, they've heard about it. They know people who are living this way. And so they know what's possible.
that's great.
So how do people find you?
AlexandraStockwell.com. You can find a link to my book, my podcast, the Intimate Marriage Podcast, my various programs, ways to reach out to me directly, my social media, my Facebook group, which is active and growing. All of it begins at AlexandraStockwell.com.
That's great. And we'll make sure we have the link to that on our podcast, wherever they appear, on YouTube or on our podcast channels. And if you guys are looking for us, you can find us at openlove101.com. Please be sure and sign up for our email list so you can find out about interviews like this with Alexandra Stockwell and other things we have going. It has been great talking to you today. We have really enjoyed this, and we're looking forward to doing more if you're up for it. There's some topics I really like to dive into and get more specific on, and I know our viewers are going to love to hear about them as well. So
I would love to talk again, and I'm really excited to share this interview with my audience as well.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Thanks so much for being here today. It's nice to meet you.
Thank you.
All right. See ya.
See ya.
Hey, baby, did you like those videos? No? If you did, subscribe below and you'll see plenty more. Yeah.